Okay, we've now cleaned all the mating surfaces of the wheels and the inner surfaces, so we should have a good electrical contact there. We can now start reassembling the motor bogie. First thing to go in is the armature. The armature only goes in one way round. As you can see from one end here, we have, that's where the brushes go. So the motor bogie fits in. And what you must do is make sure that the loop on the plastic bearings faces down, because that in effect is the suspension for the motor. So that sits in
just like that.
Like so. Now these bearings have already had a small drop of oil fitted onto the bearings to help the motor to turn. That's a nice free running action. Looking good so far. Okay, let's put the magnets in. Easier said than done. One either side of the armature. Slid into place.
I believe, people might correct me if I'm wrong, I think this was the only engine with this design.
I'm not sure about that one, but okay, we now have the armature in with the reformers. Next, magnets for the magnet adhesion, and they just sit 1, 2, and the metal spacer, the main magnet that goes in between. There we go. That gives us all the magnets now in place. And with the new bearings holding that in place, that will be a very tight fit once everything is in place. Right.
Instead of on the older one where it's just moving
Instead of in the older one where it's floating up and down. In go the driven axles, and then base plate to hold everything in place. Place the 4 screws. When tightening up things like this, remember it is only a small model. Too much force will break things, so literally just enough to nip them up. You may want to take it apart again in the near future. So just a gentle tweak, not even finger tight really, just enough so that the screws start to bite, and that will do. So first part of the motor bogie reassembly is now complete. The next part to go on, plastic former to hold the magnets in place, and that sits on top, making sure that the locating peg under here for the chassis sits properly into the former. That holds the whole thing in place. Put the fixing screw all the way back through the magnets, and that will pull the magnets and the formers into place, which in turn will make sure they don't clash with the armature and allow free running. And there we have a nice smooth action of the armature, now held properly in place by the bearings that are no longer broken. And you can see very easy turn of the wheels. Okay, next stage, we now have to reassemble the motor bogie to the chassis, remembering of course that we've got our copper wires and copper pickups in the way. First thing, always check them to make sure they're clean. because again we've taken the time to do the wheels. You don't want it wasted by the fact that you've got dirty pickups to go on the inside of the wheels.
I'm just using that same sandpaper again.
Yeah, again, just a little bit of fine emery cloth. The other ones, yeah, they're okay.
Not too hard, because obviously copper's not a very strong metal.
And they are very, very fragile. Okay.
So do take care when you do the...
Right, reassembly is literally just the reverse of putting it together, of taking it apart. First things first, make sure that you get the copper strips clipped into the plastic former, and that you get the copper pickup strips on the inside of the wheels, and that they are touching the wheels quite firmly. This has to be repeated 4 times. Making sure that the copper pickups locate on the mounting plugs correctly, little mounting pegs. Straight. And that one is number 4. So there we have copper collector strips mounted in the right place. Next thing is to get the bushes in, back into place.
Which will be a little bit of a pain, but...
Always is a little bit tricky with these. Right. Always check the condition of the isolating strip, because if that fails you end up with a live circuit between the 2 bushes, a short circuit, and it will do one of 3 or 4 things. It will trip the breaker, the thermal cutout in your controller, it will melt the brush spring, or in the worst case it will melt the wiring.
And possibly catch fire.
That's worst case scenario, but yeah, it's possible. Okay, right, next thing we need to make sure that the electrical isolation pieces that we need between the pickups are in the right places. That isolating washer is very important because it separates the live and neutral side on the motor.
Brass connector now.
That's the little brass connector which starts to hold everything together. That one should be under there. And then on top of everything goes the locking nut. That pulls everything down and holds it all into place, like so. Again, don't over tighten. Okay, on this particular engine, one of the mounting plugs is a little bit iffy. This one here, through age and use, and so just a little bit of extra care to be taken when mounting the brass connectors. Okay, now to get the brushes in place. One here that's a little bit temperamental. There we go. Right. That's the one with the insulator section in. That one's in the correct place. Now the second one. Again, just be very, very careful. The brushes are fragile. easily damaged. There we go. As you can see now, both springs are in place, holding the brushes against the armature, isolating pieces in place.
Very good.
Now we're almost finished. Replace the motor bogie onto the chassis, ensuring that you keep pickup wires correctly separated. Replace the fixing spring that holds the motor bogie onto the chassis,
like so.
and then the body into place.
Just got to put the screw in, right?
And just got to put the screw in. Yet again, be careful, don't over tighten it. They're only little brass ferrules pressed into plastic casings, easily damaged. Just tight enough for what you need. Final check would be the condition of the pickups on the second bogie. Not all engines have this. These ones aren't too bad. Maybe give them a clean later. And the electrical pickups underneath, well, they're okay as well. Only thing left to do now is test.
Right, let's just quickly put it on the track. Over to my driver now. Right. I think it's this one, isn't it?
Yep.
Point to the other control. No, it must be this one. Oh.
Something's not right. We'll stop there. Okay, here we have it. Complete chassis. Just ready for testing before we put the whole thing back together. Just to make sure.
Unfortunately, we did have a problem before, but I think it just needed a bit of oil and a bit of running
Right.
in, basically, then.
Try that. So as you can see, a much smoother, faster and quieter action. With the magnet heating that these models have, they never were the fastest, but a lot of tractive power, so they will pull a large rake of trucks or coaches.
And they also go at a very slow speed.
Very good motors. We put a tiny drop of oil on each of the worm gears, just to make sure that there's a lubrication between the axles and the rotors and the worm gears. And now what remains to be done
Is to put the body on.
is to put the body back on. Like so.
Connect and screw in the bottom.
As you can see, it still sticks hard to the track.
Very good advantage of the magnets. Very good.
Here we go. Again, don't over tighten the screw. And our engine maintenance or refurbishment is complete. Once again, off we go. This particular engine was bought as part of a set of mail coaches. It was bought as a non-runner off of eBay, but as with many of these things, it's purely a case of you can take it apart, you can clean it, you can put it back together. Especially the 1970s and early 80s models, when Hornby was still made in England, the motors were robust, well made, and would give many years of service. And even now, it's still fairly easy just to carry out the repairs that are needed to get them back to life again. Hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you found it informative. Thank you very much.